Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week.
Looking back now, the warning signs were there from the moment we arrived. Spain felt wide open to us. You weren't hemmed in like you were back home. No escorts, no heavy policing, no constant pressure. You could drink all day, wander where you liked, sing as loud as you wanted. It felt like freedom, and that's exactly what made it dangerous. Lads were already half cut before lunchtime, standing around in groups, clocking other England fans, nodding, chanting. You could tell who'd come just to watch football and who'd come because it was a chance to behave how they wanted without consequences. Everyone fed off each other. The confidence grew hour by hour. There was this feeling that nothing bad could happen. And once people believe that, they start pushing it.
England fans arrived in Spain in the summer of 1982, carrying far more than suitcases and football shirts. They arrived with a reputation that had been forged over more than a decade of domestic disorder, European away trips, and a growing sense that English football hooliganism was no longer confined to terraces at home. By the early 1980s, it had become a travelling culture. Spain, warm, cheap, relaxed, and unprepared, would become its next testing ground. In this video we are listening to stories from actual football lads that was there in Spain and tell us true accounts of their experiences, some violent, some funny. Let's jump straight in. First up is this story by a lad from Oldham.
3 of us Oldham fans had pre-booked on the Pride of Bilbao ferry from Plymouth to Santander in northern Spain. In those days, what little money you had was better off in your own pockets than in the hands of British Rail, and we arrived in Plymouth on Sunday evening, having hitchhiked down from Oldham that morning. We got our final lift from Hilton Services in a removal van containing about 20 drunk but friendly Bury lads. They had hired it for just a day, and the owner would have been pissed off when he had a call from the police on the Monday morning asking him to shift the van from the port entrance. With no interest in how the vehicle was ever getting back to Bury, the driver just stopped, turned the engine off, told us all to get out, locked the doors, and joined the hundreds of England fans attempting to drink Plymouth dry. I will always remember the night before we set off for Spain, as, to put it bluntly, I was on the bones of my arse. I had very little money coming in, and although the trip had been paid for, my spending funds were virtually nil. I was so skint the night before we were due to leave for Plymouth that I had to ask this girl he had been seeing to let me some money. All she had to her name was £1.50, and she reluctantly gave me every penny of it, as I told her I would need it for the phone when I called home every day from Spain to see if she was okay. She walked back to her flat that morning after we said our goodbyes, as she had even given me a bus fare. Of course, I never phoned her once while I was away, and it was the last time I ever saw her, which was a shame really, as she was a good sort and a lovely looking girl as well. Football is football though, so I left Oldham that Sunday morning with just a £1.50 and a few quid I had begged and borrowed. I'm not proud of this, but it shows how determined I was, and the fact I stayed for 3.5 weeks all told and had the time of my life proves I made the right choice. There were plenty of young girls in Oldham who I could pull in those days, and only one World Cup, so it was no contest really. With no interest in wasting money on a cheap B&B, we dossed down in the bogs near the docks, and we awoke at 6:30 a.m. to find dozens of other England lads all kipping on the toilet floors, something the Stone Island wearing casuals today would frown upon. In those days it was the norm. Your money was for ale and prozzies, not designer fucking sunglasses and iPods.
And here is another story by a lad that also travelled out to Spain in 82 and was in the thick of it. This is Carl's story.
We boarded the ferry at 8 a.m. and off we went. There were over 2,000 lads on that ship, and what seemed like the nation's press were there clicking the cameras, drivers and dozens of them flashing away, as some of the lads waved, but most showed them snow-white arses. The next day's headline on the front page of the Sun read, "Thatcher's boys head for Spain." Britain had been at war with Argentina for the past few weeks, and most Spaniards supported the RGs in their attempt to take the Falkland Islands away from the British. We felt like we were soldiers going to war, only there were no birds flashing their tips at us as we set sail for Spain. One bloke by me said he had heard that the government was concerned that we could be a target for the Argentine task force, which put a bit of a dampener on proceedings, but soon I was sure he was talking through his arse. As that boat left Plymouth, it was an incredibly patriotic scene, which if I'm honest made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck and even brought a lump to my throat. I climbed onto a barrier and looked down on the sight of 2,000 England fans on the deck, waving at the press. There were hundreds of banners and scarves draped over the side of the ship, and it looked fucking magnificent. Then, as one, the old deck burst into song, singing the best World Cup record ever recorded. On board, it really started to warm up. The bars opened at midday, and by 5 o'clock, most of the lads were pissed up and the rival team's chanting began. At about 8 p.m, a West Ham fan, Harry Fair, got on the microphone and announced that a member from each team should get up and give a chant for his own town team, a very early version of karaoke, and there were plenty of would-be Tom Jones willing to belt out a chant. I joined the disorderly queue and got my chance, those anti-Bolton songs, Bolton back then being Oldham's hated rivals. It was a drunken rather than brave choice, as there were only 3 of us from Oldham and over 80 wanderers in the audience, as I gave it my big anti-Bolton chant in front of over 1,000 boozed up England lads. I got serious daggers from the Bolton firm, but the rest of the lads gave me a rousing cheer as I looked for my Oldham pal who had melted away downstairs to the casino the minute the Cockney compere had introduced me and asked what I was going to sing. Eventually, a Bolton representative got up and gave it, "We hate the Cockneys!" With this, Chelsea, West Ham and Spurs attacked the Bolton mob and it all kicked off badly. It took the stewards 10 minutes to break up the brawling. A few northern lads helped the Bolton lads out, but it was very dodgy and it killed the atmosphere for a while. But an hour later, all the England fans were chanting away, apart from a few who were sporting split lips or sore heads. Another memory of that trip was the amount of England lads spewing up over the side of the boat, dozens and dozens of lads all hanging over the side throwing up. It was a really choppy trip through the Bay of Biscay at the side of France, but many lifelong friendships were made on that boat. After a sleepless night due to the noise and fact you needed to keep one eye open focused on your belongings, we made it for breakfast at 6:30 a.m. and we're pleased to see the great Bobby Moore having some grub. Even the ex-players working for the media had to go second class in those days, which today would be laughed at by some pundits, who in my eyes were not fit to wear the late Sir Bobby's soiled underpants, never mind his fucking football. As the ferry pulled into Santander, there were a few scuffles with different teams' lads, and it was a tense time as we disembarked under the watchful eye of those spiteful Spanish police, who were waiting for an excuse to dish out some local punishment. With very little money, and the berry removals van probably dumped in Plymouth, it was every man for himself, and we split up and agreed to meet in Bilbao. I got lucky and got a lift with some West Ham fans. They were top lads, and when I told them I was skin, they even gave me 20 quid. Not flash dancings like the Chelsea lot, just proper fellas. When I arrived there an hour later, there were hundreds of England fans milling about, including about 30 from Oldham who had come through France on the train. It was still 2 days before the game and the place was bouncing. The one downside was I'd lost my Oldham mates, but I met up with 2 Pompey lads, Billy and Jackie. We were pally for the next 2 days, robbing the bars and cafes, doing runners, etc. We kicked in shop doorways and anywhere else that was not covered in piss or rubbish and cockroaches. It was cheap and nasty, but the air conditioning was free. Outside was a different ball game, and there were some very serious clashes with rival England fans. Chelsea had a massive firm outside the stadium and they were attacking any northerners, but unfortunately the northern lads were not sticking together and it was getting very dodgy if you couldn't throw a southern sounding sentence together. As a newcomer to the England scene, I was disgusted by these attacks, but heard later that it was the norm and that Chelsea and West Ham liked to do their own thing, even if it involved attacking our own fans. For the second game, we all got the buses into Bilbao, and I met up with 4 more England lads before the game. I didn't have a ticket, so ended up snatching an handful of a Spanish tour outside the stadium, and duly handed them out to England fans without tickets, forgetting I was skint and not realising they were valuable beer tokens. As though we were playing Czechoslovakia, there was hardly any trouble, apart from a few English kicking off with each other. We won 2-0, and I decided to stay with me 4 English mates who had an apartment in Bilbao. After giving the tickets away, I was still skint, but Willis, one of the lads, owed me a big favour, as I'd lied on oath to get him off a serious charge a few months earlier. He told me from now on I'd want for nothing, and I didn't. Bilbao was a fantastic, vibrant city, and we were based 5 minutes from the notorious red light district, a long, bustling street snaking down an hill. Every few yards, ladies of the night plied the trade, and there were some beautiful, fit young birds on show. I tapped Willis for the 1 mil, about a fiver. It was 1 mil for any one prosy, and I took me time, parading up and down this long street for half an hour, weighing up the best bird. I finally plumped for this gorgeous, toned-up, tits-as-fuck Latino babe. "Fucky Inglese?" she asked me. I didn't need asking twice. She was small and petite and grabbed me hand, leading me down this back alley as the taxi drivers all howled with laughter as we walked past. If they thought I was going to let this bird rip me off or rob me, they were wrong. She was getting it. She may have been on the game and had many men from all over the world, but she was in for a treat. Some pure Oldham cock was going to have her begging for more, and I'd be the one laughing when I kept the 1 mil for the refreshing ale after the deed was done. Forget the beer. All I wanted to do was shag this fit babe, and she took me to this big old scruffy apartment block. The free shag plan was gone when she made me give the lady on the door me 1 mil before dragging me up the stairs. She seemed as keen as me as we went into this pitch black room with a scruffy old smelly mattress on the floor. I thought for a moment it was a setup, but I had nothing of value that could be taken, and if they wanted me shorts, t-shirt and trainers, well, they were fucking welcome to him. But she pulled me towards her and we both tumbled onto the mattress and began necking. I took off a sparkly boob tube and she wrenched down me shorts and headed south, licking me all the way down me chest, lager-filled belly and thighs. It was heaven. Then she sucked me cock for a few moments, but stopped and pushed me head south and into her crotch. And as I parted her skin-tight satin shorts, the most horrendous sight possible to any heterosexual man greeted me in the form of 2 small but defiant bollocks, and that is what I screamed out. I jumped up and began spitting out. My head was spinning. I knew I should have kicked the fuck out of this tranny who was staring up at me gobsmacked with its bollocks still hanging out, but all I wanted to do was get the fuck out of there. I ran down the street of this stinking hovel and into the night. As I hurtled down the street, the Spanish taxi drivers roared even louder with their laughter. I should have given him a dig, but just ran all the way back to our local bar. I was gutted, but had to tell the lads in the bar, the boys who would join me in trashing the sick thing, Downey was giving it an hiding. Most of them couldn't understand me problem. They told me 90% of the prostitutes were trannies and that they'd all been with them. Some didn't even claim to be pissed when they were tricked, which was going to be my excuse for not cussing out. I'd been sucked by a prosy with a funnel, not a tunnel. Disgusted, I went for a walk to gather me thoughts. I wandered around Bilbao feeling dirty, and then noticed some commotion outside a bar, as loads of locals huddled around the TVs inside. Being nosy, I went to check out what was happening, and was just in time to see Maggie Thatcher, our leader and hero, announcing to the world that Argentina had surrendered and Great Britain had won another war. Within moments, hundreds of England fans were on the streets and in the fountains of Bilbao celebrating. "We won the war!" they chanted, and the locals joined in with the wonderful celebrations taking place. The Basques hated the Spanish who backed the RGs, and the bars were giving free beer to any England fans. It was a wonderful, heartwarming night. The next night, me and Willis went for a walkabout in the early hours of the morning, found a few quiet bars and got pissed on the local lager. As we were staggering about round the Bilbao city centre, we found ourselves outside the very impressive civic centre of Bilbao. At the next game, I met my cousin Gary Walker outside the stadium. Gary was a big Man U fan, and he was with a firm of Burnley fans and Burnley Reds. He's a top lad, and he said I could stay at his place for a week. He had an apartment in a little holiday resort called Laredo, about 10 miles out of Bilbao. When I got there, I was pleased to see 10 Oldham lads staying in that resort. In fact, there were loads of England fans there and a few Northern Ireland lads, and as they were non-sympathisers, we all got on great. As you'd expect, the locals loved us, and a few of us trapped off with the local birds who were all fit as fucking pure women. I ended up shagging this gorgeous blonde bird called Tamara. She couldn't speak a word of English, but I made her laugh, and you know what the score, lads. Get a bird laughing and you're in.
With the worst part of the trip over, everybody was now looking forward to it. Most thought we had good chances of doing well, and I remember some of the Chelsea lads had their heads painted red and white and were seasoned England followers. For the first few days we played football on the beach and everything was alright, and then things turned for the worst, as they do. I got food poisoning and was in bed when I heard this noise and shouting going on outside, so I went to see what was going on. One of the England lads had his flag over the balcony and the locals were bricking the hotel and shouting abuse. I was out on a
Next up is a story from a Sheffield United lad. This is his story. Sean, Sheffield United.
The summer of 1982 were brilliant. Very hot, loads of fanny everywhere, and England playing in the World Cup in Spain. The Blades had been promoted to the old third division at the first time of asking, and had got there on average crowds of around 12,000, often taking at least half that amount away from home. This was to become a golden era in football hooliganism circles, and Spain 82 was for many going to be the icing on the cake. The new casual era had begun. Actually, it was already well established at club level, and every football club had its own mob, or firm, as they now like to call themselves. The lads at all the clubs were as concerned about how smart they looked as they were about any offs. To be honest, the two went hand in glove. Ask any 40-something lad what were the best period for fashion and violence, and I bet 95% will say the early 1980s. Fucking mad times. One of the lads mentioned that he'd seen an advert in a local paper for cheap travel and accommodation for the first phase of the competition with a company called Transalpine, which were an offshoot of another firm called Sports World Travel. Turns out that they were offering deals for rail camping tours from £249.50. This were it. We cracked it, eh? We're going to do them froggy bastards good style. The Blades were on the march. Most lads would hitchhike, go on the ferry, fly, hire cars and rob the shops on the way to pay the way, anything just to get there. No silly fucking banning orders or border checkpoints or any of the bollocks, just pack a bag and off you went. For the opening game in Bilbao, the atmosphere were unbelievable. Then as now, you can spot the English in a football crowd anywhere, simply because they always look smarter than all those greasy foreign cunts. There we all were in our smart Slazenger tops, cricket hats, Fred Perry shorts and Adidas trainers. We looked fucking amazing with our wedge haircuts, with a lot of the lads wearing Bulldog Bobby t-shirts as well. The Basque town of Bilbao had never seen anything like this. We were here for a bottle and a battle, and we weren't to be disappointed. The stadium were ultra-modern compared to the shitholes we were used to back home. They actually had flushing toilets instead of mud huts to piss in, and the stairways leading into the ground were concrete and not wood. It were like landing on another planet. The end that we entered were two-tiered, and we were on the lower standing section directly behind the goal. Altogether a mob of about 400 to 500 English positioned themselves here, and you could sense the uneasy atmosphere. We were obviously in the French end of the ground, and it would only take a minor incident to start the expected violence. Supporters from many clubs were there from all over England. Peterborough, Lincoln, Hull City, Chelsea, Bolton, Millwall were all well represented, with some solid little firms from Kings Lynn, Doncaster and Exeter, places you hardly ever hear about nowadays. Most of the French lot had them fucking irritating air horns, you know, the type that you can hear from a million miles away, and they were blaring out non-stop. Everyone was getting more and more pissed off with them as the match got underway, but with just 27 seconds on the clock, the horns were muffled when Brian Robson, complete with trendy permed hair, headed in from, I think, Paul Mariner's cross. It was straight in front of the ranks of English casuals and caused total mayhem. We all went ballistic, dozens of us surging forward like they used to on the Kop at Anfield as we celebrated, 80 degrees drunk and England 1-0 up after less than a minute. Top that fucker! Coins then began raining down on us from the seats above. Typical cowardly French bastards. An Exeter fan, a big lad with a Lacoste top on, threw a smoke canister into the nearest seats in the upper tier, and then it all went mad for just a couple of minutes. Turns out you could buy these smoke bombs from any of the local shops. Apparently they were quite commonly used in the local bullfighting shows in the old part of town, and anyone could buy them. The police soon moved in and started whacking anybody who was in the vicinity. Of course,
course, by now the French do what they do best and started to back off. Gaps were opening up on the terraces, 1970s style, and you could see the panic and confusion spreading amongst them. I thought, fucking hell, this is brilliant. But at the same time, you had to be wary of getting a clump off one of the Spanish cops, and it were pretty scary. Anybody who says they've not been frightened while involved in any football violence is a fucking lying bastard. It's just that you get an adrenaline rush at the time and try and keep it together. I saw a few lads being carted off, but from what everyone was saying, most were just ejected from the ground and not many locked up. If that happened in this day and age, the authorities would want to ban you for life. The rest of the game passed off largely without major incident, and afterwards we all trooped off towards the main town square area. A lot of the northern teams stuck together. We mingled with groups from Leeds, which was previously unheard of, lads from Hull, Darlington, Middlesbrough, who were a very handy bunch, and a few Scousers who, true to the name they're given, were all professional thieves and conmen. We did this because word was spreading that a large Chelsea gang were attacking any non-Cockneys. You hear a lot of this going on while abroad watching England, but I personally never saw anything like that happening. I must admit, though, that there was a strong us and them attitude at the time, possibly due to the fact that the far right had allegedly infiltrated firms from Millwall, Chelsea and West Ham during the late 70s and early 80s to manipulate them and use football as cover for their own dodgy purposes. Watching Sheffield United at that time were a number of black lads, and they were all game, so we didn't want anything to do with any of these racist cunts who were spreading the poison amongst the Cockney teams. By and large, though, the World Cup of 1982 was superb. Some of the lads had been to Italy in 1980 for the European Championships and spoke of how good that was for the matches in Turin, etc. But Spain 82 were a memorable trip too. All the blades stuck together as usual and gave as good as they got. England had exported their own unique brand of soccer violence, complete with designer dress sense and wedge haircuts into Europe, and millions had watched it on TV. The Blades had been there as well, and I were one of them. I've still got my match ticket and the Pringle polo shirt I wore for the France game, just never got round to chucking it out. 38-inch chest, and more than that round me fucking waist now.
England isn't really my scene. I like to be around people I can trust, and I'm afraid that some of the northern fellas I met at England games do too many beers for me, and I've never had the same feeling for England as I have for West Ham. I was asked by one Mike Ross of Ross Travel to take a coach load of England fans to the World Cup in Spain in '82. The coach left Knightsbridge and we travelled over to a village in northern Spain called Zorautz. We travelled over 24 hours and only stopped twice to go to the toilet as traffic was terrible. But then we arrived at this really nice little village with a big wide beach, and we stayed in this really nice hotel. With the worst part of the trip over, everybody was now looking forward to it. Most thought we had good chances of doing well, and I remember some of the Chelsea lads had their heads painted red and white and were seasoned England followers. For the first few days we played football on a beach and everything was all right, and then things turned for the worst, as they do. I got food poisoning and was in bed when I heard this noise and shouting going on outside, so I went to see what was going on. One of the England lads had his flag over the balcony and the locals were bricking the hotel and shouting abuse. I was out on a balcony area and was trying to calm the situation down because I was obviously the courier, but was getting nowhere. Within minutes, they started bunging things at me, and for self-preservation, I started bunging things back. I was running out of things to bung, so I asked the people on the lower balcony floor, 2 Tottenham fans who had some frozen cans of lager, to throw them up to me. There was quite a mob of them down below us by now, and I saw that the main antagonists of the group were sticking their heads out and popping them back after throwing things up. So I threw a couple of cans one after another very quickly, and the first one missed, but as this lad stuck his head out, I copped him with the second one, and they carted him away, spark out. The owner of the hotel was a nice fella, and he couldn't understand the way the English behaved. I explained to him that this is the way many English lads enjoy themselves, but they are a much quieter race than us, and he just couldn't really understand it. There was a lot of patio furniture thrown over the balcony during a bit of action we had with them, so he said to me, "Will you come and help me sort it out and get it in?" And as I was the rep, I went down there. Before we got started, a hostile gathering are pointing fingers at me, saying, "That's the one, he's the one." I said, No, they've made a mistake. He said, "They're saying it's you."
To understand what happened during the 1982 World Cup, it is important to understand what English football culture looked like at the time. The late 1970s and early 1980s marked the peak of the hooligan era. Across England, organised football firms followed their clubs home and away every weekend. Violence was ritualised, territorial and often expected. Arrests were common, injuries were accepted, and reputations were built through confrontation. For many involved, football was no longer just about the match. It was about the journey, the streets, and the confrontation that might come with it. By 1982, these men were older, more experienced, and more confident. Many had already travelled abroad with their clubs. Some had been to European competitions. Others had been part of large-scale domestic disorder that regularly made the national press. When England qualified for the World Cup in Spain, thousands of supporters made plans to travel, and among them were hardened away regulars and firm members from across the country. Spain itself was emerging from decades of dictatorship. Policing styles were different, more relaxed in public spaces, and less familiar with the specific patterns of English football disorder. Alcohol was cheap and widely available. City centres were open late. Bars spilled into streets and squares. For travelling English fans, it felt like freedom. And that sense of freedom would shape everything that followed. England's group matches were spread across different cities, but from the moment fans began arriving, trouble was never far away. Bilbao became one of the earliest flashpoints. English supporters congregated in bars and plazas, drinking from mid-morning onwards. Singing echoed through narrow streets. At first, it felt celebratory. But as numbers grew and alcohol took hold, tensions rose. Incidents in Bilbao rarely began as planned confrontations. They often started with shouting, chanting, or drunken arguments. A comment made in a bar. A glass smashed on a table. A chair picked up in anger. Once violence began, it spread quickly. English fans moved in groups, sometimes dozens strong, pushing through streets, scattering locals and tourists alike. Bottles and furniture became weapons. Shops shut their shutters. Families cleared out of cafes. Police response was initially hesitant, unsure of the scale of what they were facing. When Spanish police did intervene, their presence often escalated situations rather than calming them. Baton charges sent groups running, only for them to regroup in nearby streets. This pattern repeated itself over several days. Disorder would flare up, be broken up, and then reappear elsewhere. There was no single riot, but rather a constant atmosphere of instability. What made Spain 1982 distinctive was not just the violence, but the collective nature of it. English fans from rival clubs found themselves drinking together, singing together, and backing each other instinctively when trouble began. Club loyalties were temporarily set aside. In Spain, many saw themselves as representing England rather than West Ham, Chelsea, Leeds, or Manchester United. This created a sense of unity that amplified behaviour. Individuals felt emboldened by the crowd around them. Among those present were members and associates of many well-known firms. West Ham's Intercity firm, Chelsea's Headhunters, Millwall's Bushwhackers, Leeds Service Crew, Manchester United's Red Army, Tottenham supporters, Arsenal followers, Birmingham City's Zulus, and others. Not all were actively seeking violence, but the presence of experienced troublemakers shaped the atmosphere. Younger fans followed their lead. Behaviour escalated quickly. As England progressed through the group stage, disorder followed the movement of supporters. After England's victory over France, celebrations spilled into city centres and bars. Singing turned aggressive. French supporters were targeted, chased from drinking spots, and intimidated. Police responded more forcefully. Arrests were made. Injuries were reported. Spanish media began to focus heavily on English fans, using language that portrayed them as organised gangs rather than football supporters. The press coverage fed into the situation. British tabloids initially downplayed the incidents or framed them as isolated scuffles. Spanish newspapers were far more critical, highlighting the impact on local communities and the fear caused in city centres. The label of English hooligans became a regular headline. For the fans involved, this attention had mixed effects. Some saw it as a warning, others saw it as confirmation of their reputation. As the tournament progressed, Spanish policing tactics changed. Riot police were deployed in greater numbers. Officers patrolled areas known to attract English fans. Bars were closed early. Fans were escorted or contained. Anyone wearing England colours attracted attention. This heavier approach created resentment. English supporters felt targeted, watched and restricted. For some, this sense of persecution reinforced the US against them mentality that had already developed. Away from the matches themselves, rumours spread constantly. Stories circulated of fans being arrested overnight, beaten in custody or deported. Some were true, others were exaggerated, but all contributed to a growing atmosphere of tension. Mornings were spent piecing together the events of the night before. Afternoons began with drinking again. By evening, emotions were already running high. Not all English fans were involved in violence. Many travelled simply to support the team and enjoy the tournament. But the actions of a minority shaped perceptions of the whole. Families avoided certain areas. Local residents grew wary of groups of English supporters. Police prepared for trouble even when none had yet occurred. The cycle fed itself. England's eventual elimination from the tournament did little to calm matters immediately. Large numbers of fans remained in Spain, drifting between cities, continuing to drink, and occasionally clashing with police or locals. The World Cup became less about football and more about survival, reputation, and memory. Looking back, Spain 1982 occupies an important place in the history of English football disorder. It was not the deadliest or most destructive episode, but it was a turning point. It demonstrated that hooliganism could be exported wholesale. It showed that international tournaments were not immune, and it exposed how unprepared host nations could be when faced with large numbers of travelling English supporters. The lessons of Spain were not fully learned at the time. 2 years later, English fans would again be involved in serious disorder at the European Championships in France. 3 years after that, tragedy would strike at Heysel. Spain 1982 sits between these events, a warning that went largely unheeded. For those who were there, memories of Spain remain vivid. Sun-soaked streets, cheap beer, long days that blurred into nights, sudden violence erupting without warning, the sense of unity and hostility existing side by side. For Europe, Spain 1982 marked the moment when English football's problems could no longer be seen as purely domestic. The tournament ended, the fans went home, and English football continued. But the reputation followed. Spain 1982 became part of the story that shaped how English supporters were treated for decades to come. Increased policing, intelligence sharing, travel restrictions, and surveillance all have roots in experiences like this. In hindsight, Spain 1982 was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a wider culture that had grown unchecked. A culture that mixed football, identity, alcohol, and violence into something far larger than the game itself. For a few weeks in the summer of 1982, under the Spanish sun, that culture was on full display. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.